this opening event for planning workshop of coordinated audit of socio-economic aid programs that the countries in the region have implemented within the context of COVID-19. Before starting our interventions today, I would like to inform that this event has simultaneous translations, and you can make use of the chat for the post comments regarding the presentations. This event will be recorded for posterior use. We have different entities for the fight against corruption, promotion of gender equality, improvement of performance audit, capacity building that allow audit teams to strengthen audit planning proposal. We invite Mrs. Valentina Zaret Montalvo, Deputy Comptroller General of Ecuador and President of a Specialized Working Group in the fight against transnational corruption, to tell us more about this initiative for both OLACEFS community and external stakeholders. Mrs. Zarate has constantly been involved in the initiatives to combat corruption of that entity internationally and is one of the main promoters of this audit. Distinct members of the international community and members of the programs for socio-economic aid that the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have implemented within the context of COVID-19. Received the greetings from the Comptroller General Office of the State of Ecuador as a president of OLACEFS Working Group specialized in the fight against transnational corruption, the entity that has the first time led a project of this magnitude with the participation of multiple coordinated audits over the years. It is a pleasure to inaugurate this planning workshop in the presence of organizations dedicated to the improving socio-economic conditions of the region, preventing acts of corruption that hinder such efforts. Also welcome the representatives of the German Development Cooperation Agency, GIZ, and the Latin American and Caribbean Organizations of Supreme Audit Institutions, OLACEFS. In this meeting, I would like to highlight the outstanding participation of technical bodies of the International Supreme Audit Community and audited teams belonging to the SAIs in the region. Since October last year, the bodies in charge of governmental audits in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, we have committed to recognizing both good practices and potential irregularities in the management of such economic packages implemented to alleviate the economic effects of the pandemics in the most vulnerable sectors. In this context, we emphasize that for the OLACEFS Working Group in the fight against transnational corruption, the GTCT of OLACEFS, the assurance of social and economic rights through public policies and programs is key to guaranteeing just, solid, and free societies, free from corruption. However, these rights are in danger in the context of global emergencies, such as the one caused by COVID-19. In this context, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, warned the economic costs of the pandemics, among which I highlight the increase of unemployment, poverty, and extreme poverty. This warning takes even greater relevance if we consider the historic and cultural inequality of Latin American countries. In fact, the ECLAC indicated that poverty and extreme poverty reached in 2020 levels that have not been observed in the last 20 years. Just in 2020 alone, the total number of poor people rose to 22 million. The levels of poverty and extreme poverty would be even greater without the measures implemented by the governments to transfer emergency income to households. The described scenario puts in jeopardize the social rights and the protection of the population at risk. As indicated by ECLAC in 2021 Economic Outlook, social protection should be considered as an investment for development and training and as a matter to guarantee the rights and well-being of all people. That is why that the response of various international reports published in the peak of the pandemics, the group's presidency proposed an organization and coordinated audit focusing on social and economic aid programs. In addition to highlight the importance of such initiatives, the reports emphasize the prevention of corruption and possible frauds in such programs. Precisely, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in April 2020 issued a report, Accountability and Prevention of Corruption in the Allocation and Distribution of Emergency Economic Aid Packages in the context of the pandemic COVID-19, identifying immediate measures and comprehensive audit, supervision, accountability, report and mechanisms to monitor the disbursement process and verify its proper reception. That is, in such document, the role of SAIs is ensure the correct functioning of social benefits. As mentioned above, the approach of this initiative takes into consideration the challenges that states have to achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda for the SDGs. For this reason, we would like to evaluate the goal 1.5 of goal 1, eradication of poverty, which already foresees foster the resilience of poor people and people in vulnerable situations, reducing their exposure and vulnerability to extreme weather-related events and other economic, social, and environmental crises and disasters. The pandemic undoubtedly put this goal into test, forcing governments to expand and redesign social benefits. Likewise, given the pressures to implement such programs, it is probable that there was greater flexibility regarding internal controls that ensure proper planning, application, and transparency of such programs. This also affects Goal 16.5 of the Sustainable Development Goal 16, Peace, Justice and Stronger Institutions, which seeks to significantly reduce corruption and bribery in all its forms. Commitment that is of vital importance for the mission of the work group that seeks, through the cooperation, contribute to social public administrations with efficient management of resources, mitigating acts of corruption. Transversal to these goals, we have the concern to eradicate gender gaps as provided by Sustainable Development Goal 5 of the 2030 Agenda. This aspect increases during this emergency. Economic transfers and social benefits in kind do not consider gender criteria in the implementation. For this reason, UN Women recommends the incorporation of intersectional approach in the planning and implementation to respond to the needs of women and their diversity. Due to the aspects described, the objective and the planning of current audit combine a perspective of prevention of corruption and human development with a gender perspective. In addition to these considerations, with the support of GIZ and the Civil Association for Equality and Justice, citizen participation is also a fundamental axis within the planning, consolidation, and dissemination of the results of the coordinated audit. This dimension is included in the recognition of the historical work of Latin American and Caribbean Organization of SAIs, OLACEFS. within their control actions. So now it is, we propose this criterion to be promoted in the audits with a regional scope. However, the type of audit has also been carefully thought out, considering that according ISSAI 300, performance auditing promotes accountability by helping those with the governance and oversight responsibilities to improve their performance. With that in mind, both said standard as ISSAI 3000 have been standards that have guided the planning of the performance audit of economic effectiveness and efficiency of social economic aid programs. Additionally, the methodological advice given by Dr. Jose Oyola, a well-known consultant for SAI community, made possible to refine the planning metrics so it correspond to an audit of such kind. In the planning metrics that will be discussed in this workshop, has been crucial to know both the preparation and the management of social economic aid programs. Preparation is key, since the infrastructure that allows taking to carry out socio-economic programs in those countries already existed. However, the modality and coverage changed in the context of confinement and economic impact of this emergency. Planning is another aspect that can ensure that the objective of these programs is achieved. So here, the selection of beneficiaries, the design of the benefits is essential. Likewise, the matrix has incorporated a criterion of transparency and accountability in order to know how the communication of these procedures and results was during the execution of these programs. Finally, we included a component to understand the role of SAIs, which seeks the exchange of knowledge among participants to know some good control practices implemented in the execution of audit actions to face the obstacles derived of these pandemics. We are sure that the intervention plan today will be a relevant input for improvement of these planning metrics. We invite the participating teams to have a critical, inclusive, and purposeful look when reviewing the components, audit questions, sources, and risks. The exercise of governmental control in activities of regional impact, such as this one, that summons us today, comes from the interest of the different Latin American Caribbean organizations of supreme audit institutions, OLACEFS, in complying with the provisions of INTOSAI P12 standard that seeks to make the difference in the lives of citizens and demonstrate the value and benefits of the SAIs. We are aware that the region faces an important challenge to obtain a post-pandemic economic recovery. Therefore, we invite the external stakeholders and governments in the region to follow up this initiative. By monitoring together, we will achieve better results. We once again thank all the participants, and we wish you an excellent journey of work.
Muchas gracias, abogada Zárate, por su intervención.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zárate, for this review that make us think the impact of this coordinated audit in the aids in the region, which are key to achieve the best social rights of this population. Continuing with our agenda, we will see now a video that synthesizes the most important projects of this coordinated audit and invites the international community to join this audit process. How is the preparation of governments to deal with emergency situations? COVID-19 pandemics led many people in vulnerable situation, and due to that, governments have implemented social economic aid packages. In this context, the GTCTs of OLACEF, together with GIZ, will carry out a coordinated audit to evaluate the impacts of such programs in performing the SDGs 1, 5, and 16. And as such, the SAIs of these countries will evaluate the audit and the effectiveness of those economic aid packages, which contemplate gender criteria in the programs and selection of beneficiaries and the participation of citizens to prepare analysis. We are facing a challenge for the post-pandemic recovery, and in order to do so, we invite society and governments to embrace this activity, unite to the control. Now we give the floor to Erin Ramirez, who since November 2017 has worked at GIZ as Director of Regional Project for Strengthening of External Control Environmental Area, an initiative of German cooperation that consists OLACEFS and the Court of Accounts of the Union of Brazil. Currently, he is responsible for preparing the possible new regional project between GIZ and OLACEFS in order to strengthen external control for a more effective prevention, the fight against corruption. And GIZ has played a key role in obtaining technical assistance to strengthen the work group of this audit in Peru, in Ecuador. Thank you very much, Antoine. Thank you, colleagues. I believe you can hear me well. So, first of all, I would like to greet all of you, and I hope that you are safe and sound. A special greets to Sarah, to Dr. Sarate from the Republic of Ecuador, Comptroller General. Thank you very much for your words and highlighting the relevance of the SEIs in this pandemics. I also would like to greet Mr. Jaron Klatt, the president in the Canadian Auditing and Accountability Foundation, and my colleague, Christina Heater, the regional advisor for UNODC, and also Mr. Ashana Shirsat, the Deputy Director General for the Department of Professionalization and Relevance of SAI, where we have this important dialogue considering the importance of IDI INTOSAI. I would like to greet Mrs. Daniela Santana, representing the Comptroller General Office of the Republic of Chile in the Special Working Group for Gender, and all the other colleagues that are following up on behalf of the civil society, Dr. Oyola, a great collaborator and ally in training efforts for this performance of this in Latin America, and other colleagues that and I would like to briefly share a presentation to comment the role of the German cooperation, GIZ, and our contribution. Just a second, please. Well, I believe we have this in the screen already. So what is GIZ? We are part of a company of the German government dedicated to support international cooperation for sustainable development. We carry out actions also in international education and development of strategic competences. And we work as a private company, but with public utility resources. We work in more than 120 countries, implementing projects with more than 22,000 employees, collaborating in more than 1,500 projects.
We have been working also in the SAIs. The main pillar of the work that we do in GIZ has to do with sustainability in three main pillars: social responsibility, green balance, and economic efficiency. In Latin America, just to give you an example, we mainly work in topics that have to do with environment, climate change, biodiversity. We work on governance as well, which is the case of the work conducted by the OLACEFS and the SAIs, and other topics like cooperations and cooperation for the productive sector in cooperation with the economic sector. Now, when we think about the SAI's cooperation, we can think about different projects that are conducted globally. And this has to do with what Ms. Sarate talked about. She talked about the work in which we can contribute to strengthening the capabilities of SAIs. How is it that we can develop or build the capabilities, how we can promote the relation with external and internal stakeholders, and also to foster the knowledge exchange and the work that we can do with experts in the short and long run. And for that, something that it's important is to support the dissemination of the importance and benefit that SAIs provide, which are the principles underlying one of the main principles of INTOSAI P12. The German corporation is involved in many global projects, for instance, strengthening of SAIs in order to strengthen capacities that have to do with the environment, and also some interaction with SAIs in Latin America. There are certain projects with direct intervention in Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador, and regionally, this project that we're having with the OLACEFS through the working group specialized in corruption fight. We have an array of different topics. There's one related with external control and some that have to do with Agenda 2030 implementation, also some that have to do with citizens engagement, some related to healthcare, anti-corruption, energy sector. So as you can see, the different sectors in which SAIs play a key role. The current project is a project in which we've been working for more than 5 years on the implementation of actions that are related to three main fields of action. First, strengthening capabilities and methodologies that are applied to the environmental sector in order to foster a better oversight and governance, also cooperation with SAIs, and also to help on the interaction among different SAIs, and also the interaction with other counterparts and other strategic partners like other regional SAIs, and something that has to do with the communication. How is it that we can make public something that could be seen as an abstract topic for the public in general, but it's essential in order to provide or to ensure a better quality of life as a result of a better allocation of the funds that can meet the needs of the citizen. And also this is also that has to do with the responsibility and accountability that all public servants have when it comes to resources that manage, taxes that are being managed by those entities. We've had the pleasure to work with all OLACEFs. We have worked also with the GTCT. We've been working in many initiatives, and we're very pleased and we feel very proud for having us to work with all of you in initiatives that have to do with the role of the SAIs in illegal traffic of flora and fauna, and now the possibility we have to be involved in this coordinated audit. We also have worked in these coordinated audits in the past, which are important because there's a methodological process that is needed for the work that needs to be conducted. We're talking about processes that foster knowledge exchange and that addresses things and topics that are a priority, like for instance, the impacts of the current pandemic impacts on the society. And in this case, how is it that SAIs could play a role in order to foster not only efficacy, but also accountability and favorable results when it comes to funds or socio-economic aid programs that are being offered to the society in such a difficult and critical moment for all of us. The pandemic hit and disrupted. And as Intosai chairman said, he said that SAIs and all stakeholders engaged in the governmental control need to be adjusted to a new reality, need to turn to the knowledge they have and to the experience they have. And we have the pleasure to be able to cooperate and to work together. And that's why we really welcome this opportunity to work with all of you, always thinking about how we can benefit the citizens. There are different actions that we are taking or that we're carrying out, which is to develop regional initiatives and offer support for that, to promote the usage of digital technologies, to foster actions for anti-corruption, and also, as Mrs. Sarate said, the importance that has also the gender equity, how we can have to keep in mind how to avoid an impact on vulnerable populations. And this is something that is important when we think about this coordinated audit, because this really helps on the usage of different tools and also to think about an approach that will allow to have a better results, higher efficacy on these socio-economic aid programs. The German cooperation has had many pillars of action. What has to do to support the organization of food aid and social transfer, and many other topics. But one of the main topics has been the support to the SAIs and also to anti-corruption entities or bodies. There's a framework and a context within governments are reacting in a quickly fashion, a very executive way, but on the other hand, this could also create some space for a higher transparency and greater accountability. And that's how SAIs have different tools and some adjustments have been made on the Constitution. I'm talking about the scope. So SAIs could not only have a role for monitoring and some preventive role, but also there are certain methodologies in which SAIs have been involved. And some global forums exist in which we also have been involved. As for this partnership with OLACEFS through this working group specialized in anti-corruption fight, there are certain topics that we are approaching. One has to do with the pandemic and keeping in mind procurement, global public procurement processes, thinking about how we can promote home working from home, and also through our auditors, how is it that we can cooperate with external stakeholders, always thinking about a strategic planning in spaces in which external control and the work of the SAIs that you are to carry out could be could be something that the public could understand. And for us, as I said, it's a privilege, and we would like to thank you, all of you again, the opportunity to work together with you in this process. We're very happy that the approach that we're using in the project, which is to contribute with certain resources and also to offer technical support and methodological support that we can offer together with the leader of this project could have impact on a specific actions like this project and online courses and the follow-up that we will offer in the coming days. The exchange of knowledge could really improve the policies and the projects and the dissemination of recommendations. So in these processes, we could really see efficacy, transparency, and the accountability that we need to offer to the civil society as a whole, as it's been stated in the Intosai P12 of Intosai. So just a quick message from the regional cooperation. I would like to send a message and also to the whole team in charge of the cooperation and technical coordination. We're very happy and we feel very proud to be here as auditor group, as a representative of the SAIs. And the support won't be restricted to June, which is the time in which this strategic cooperation will end. I'm happy to tell you that in May, we started a new process, a new strategic partnership project with OLACEFS. I would like to greet Shana from IDI and other counterparts who are also working in order to design a new regional project to fight corruption. And in the coming months, we will be cooperating for 3 more years. And in behalf of the German corporation, this is going to be part of the efforts that we hope could contribute for SAIs to strengthen even more their capabilities and the potential that you can offer to societies, to different citizens in your countries. So once again, Mrs. Sarate and colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all today. The agency is helping and here to support you in everything you may need. Thank you very much once again. Thank you very much to Edwin. It's been a pleasure to work in these initiatives as part of the cooperation, and we seen the German cooperation always open to support this kind of initiatives. So based on Erwin's highlights, we see the importance of articulating OLACEFS to even furthermore the government auditing in the region. This is an innovation and collaboration perspective. Now we would like to greet the work that has been done by GIZ, and we wish a lot of successes in the new project for fighting corruption. Continuing with the interventions for this meeting, we give the floor to Sharon Clark, expert in performance auditing, former principal director of the Office of Auditor General of Canada, 2006 to 2019. Today, she's the Vice President of Professional Development of the Canadian Foundation for Auditing and Accountability. The foundation is a nonprofit organization which fosters audit and the good governance in the public sector in Canada and worldwide as well. So Sharon, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen. Let me just see if I can do that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to OLACEF, to Mr. Barquete, thanks to Ms. Zarate, to Mr. Ramirez for inviting me to take part of this workshop. For me, it's an honor to be here with all of you in such an important task. The CAAF for accountability offers training, offers courses and workshops as well on the performance audit and other things that have to do with the audit. We publish reports in English, French, and now in Spanish as well. And we work with Antoside, with IDI in many countries worldwide in order to foster audit and accountability in the public sector. I worked for 13 years in the office of the Auditor General of Canada in the audit area. The SAI in Canada was established in 1978, and in 1950 they realized that compliance audit was important, and in 1977 they started to conduct performance audit, and in 1995 there was the mandate to conduct environmental audit and also sustainable development audits as well. The standard 3000, ISSAI 3000, are the performance audits, and I was part of the Intersite committee which defined these standards some years ago. I also work on the performance audit manual for Canada with the guidelines, all the templates and all the procedures that have to do with this performance audit. I also would like to show you another product of IDI, and I'm sure that many of you know this. This is the initiative for IDI, and they published this guideline, which is called ISAM, which is a model for auditing all the SDGs, and they recommend the usage of audit process which complies with the requirements of the ISSAI standard. Complying with these standards is important, but sometimes it's also difficult. And that's why I would like to comment some aspects about the performance audit, which are very, very challenging. So let's talk about the performance audit definition. We need to determine whether actions, systems, operations, programs, activities of government are operating according to the principles of the economy, efficiency, and efficacy. But I add an important word, which is well, because oftentimes it's difficult to assess and to determine whether everything is being done in an efficient manner, if it's complying with certain efficacy principles. But I think that we all know when a program is operating well, if results are being obtained and are really benefiting the citizens. And when it comes to the Intosai P12 standard, I always say that in order to conduct performance audit, we need to think as a citizen. We need to think about the expectations of that citizen, and that the government can really provide healthcare services, education, transportation, and safety services to that citizen. It's not only a matter of complying with laws or standards, but to provide services so citizens could really receive the benefit of public funds or public resources. What is it that we audit? Well, in the Canadian audit entity, we can audit everything. There are auditors in every single province and in big cities, and they assess the programs of the government. I'm sure that we audit the 3E, but also all the commitments of governments, everything that has to do with things that are important for citizens, in order to understand why is it that they do achieve or not the results of a program. We need to be able to evaluate the processes that are part of a program, because if processes won't work, results won't be obtained. And in human resources, for instance, this is a key element of any governmental program. If there are no processes to hire people who don't have the expertise and training needed, if there's no proper training, if there's an informal process, we may have employees who don't have the competencies to execute the work needed. And if they don't do their work properly, they won't be able to achieve the desired results. Now, the criteria that we may use are different.
performance audit goes beyond compliance. There is the the professional standards like COBIT and COSO, international commitments, the SDGs. All the indicators are external sources for criterion. And we have to audit what affects the citizens the most and identify the pertinent criteria. Another difficult stage in performance auditing is compiling all the information, and because it's not just a matter of comply or not comply. We have to ask if it is well complied, define the expectations for each authority based in the sources, and the task is establishing this work plan metrics, which is the task that we proposed. For that, we need experience. We have to document how the evidence support the potential findings and how, and this requires a lot of professional judgment, and the quality control process is very important. Here we include questioning the rationale, the thinking among the members of the team to be sure that you reach the right conclusion. Another important aspect is the communication with the audit bodies. We have to communicate the criteria in the beginning so they understand how they will be evaluated. They have to understand what is the nature of the audit, what are the stages, the processes, what information do auditors need, up to what stage we have the window opened to compile information, because things change in the way. The SAI in Canada, they can write a draft with the comments of what was researched and surveyed, and we take the time to have a lot of discussions in this stage, because what we want is that things improve for the best, and so that the report have an impact. And this type of publicity, of promotion, is very important to have the improvement of the way the governments execute things. In this very day when we publish the report, we have a press release with the government, and we listen to the journalists, we thank the auditor for their research, and we propose the changes to better serve the citizens of Canada. Easy to say, not as much to do. What happens when there is a consequence? There is public pressure, organizations of civil society that have a lot of power, and the power of the citizens is very important to take into consideration. Now, going back to the SDGs, in Canada, we carried out an audit in 2018 to prepare to implement the SDGs. And we concluded that the government of Canada was not prepared to comply with them, to comply the UN SDGs. Canada government had the commitment of implementing the UN SDGs, but at the end of the audit, they don't have the structure, they don't have a plan for the implementation with systems to measure, monitor, and inform about their implementation to the general controller. So what happened after the publication of this report? They started to act upon the problems, including the objectives, to have a better coordination on the different levels of the government, the civil society and the private sector, creating a strategy to review the Agenda 2030 in Canada with specific targets for Canada. But, and recently, we published another report on the SDGs, concluding that for SDG 1, they established a national target of 50% decrease in poverty, and the progress is measured by the Canadian Agency for Statistics and Demography that consider all the services provided and the basic food basket for the population. And between 2015 and 19, so just before the pandemics, we had evolved. And in 2018, we complied with the intermediate target to reduce poverty in 20%, reducing poverty in 20%. But we didn't measure if the public policies were coherent and what could have been done in other countries if they were less ambitious. Recently, we had the audit of AIDS in Canada, concluding that the audit bodies could have worked much faster to establish a program for the workers that lost their job and source of income due to the pandemics, and the audits decided to trust in automatic controls to validate. So just after, only after the department introduced additional controls of prepayment to avoid abuses in the use of this aid. That started about $500 million paid. But we still have to imagine the level of fraud that was produced and the corruption. So we still have a lot of auditing work in Canada to know how the things were carried out. So the work that you are studying is extremely important. Having a coordinated audit of social economic aid programs in the context of the pandemic is extremely important. There has been amazing work. I read many times the references for the program, and for me, the most important aspects are those. With regards to SDG 1 and 16, with the objective that the most vulnerable sectors of society can face the measures of confinement, of lockdown, considering the reduction of procedures and internal control that threatens the efficacy and integrity of such programs. Clearly, it could include, it is 1, but it could include 16 and 5 as well. So it is interesting to see the relationship between SDGs and auditing that is so important. Here we see the SDGs, 1.5, reducing the exposure and vulnerability of poor people and extremely poor people, and to socio-economic and environmental events. And we could include health as well. And 16.5, reduce substantially corruption and bribery and all of its forms. But I'm very, very happy that the region is involved in this process, and I hope that we can contribute to the courses and workshops that we have now available in Spanish, and help with the virtual capacity building. Last year, we know that there is the MOOC and other resources in IDI for e-learning, and there is a combination with virtual or online courses and in-presence courses. So auditors can make questions or live courses, so they can make questions and understand how to evolve in the performance audit. And I'm very happy with this team and establishing this relationship with OLACEFS and GIZ. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Sharon. For no doubt, the performance audit has important benefits when we evaluate them and we send the benefits for these programs that in the end of the day use public resources. And we also recognize the work of CAAF to train our SAIs in the region in this type of audit and supplying educational materials in the internet as the courses you just mentioned. The transversion SDGs is very important as mentioned, and the idea is exactly to leave no one behind. With this, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Christina Ritter, a regional anti-corruption advisor of UNODCs, an entity of great support for the initiatives carried out by the working group that during 2020 published various reports so that the bodies maintain an adequate control regarding the programs and execution of social economic aid packages. Mrs. Ritter, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Antoine. No, well, will share my screen. But before anything, I would like to thank OLACEFS, the organizers, and the audience for inviting us to take part in this important initiative. Thank you very much, the Comptroller General of Office of Ecuador, Mrs. Zarate, the president of this group. And today, I will mention the potential risks of corruption in the implementation of social economic aid programs during emergencies. At the end of the presentation, I will publish a link that will allow for assessing all the documents developed about this topic that is in the webpage of UNODC. So to recover a little bit the global context, as we all know, last year at March 11, the WHO announced the COVID-19 outbreak, and we faced the need. We had the need to face an unprecedented challenge with the world sanitary crisis and we had to adopt a series of measures to contain and mitigate the propagation of virus that had consequences for economy, and we have to find a balance that in between closing the market but without causing world economic collapse. And that's why throughout this time many benefit social, economic, and sanitary aid programs were proposed to protect the most vulnerable sectors of the society. So here we can see the main axis on these efforts to protect citizens. So on one hand, we see economic insurance programs for workers that lost their jobs or that had their salaries suspended, and also companies at risk. And second, mobilize medical resources, institutions, and human capital, buying oxygen, buying protective equipment, building field hospitals to face the sanitary emergency, and also resources for social, psychosocial support to strengthen the physical and mental well-being during this period of lockdown. And throughout all this access, there are help and aid that was implemented through bonuses, through incentives, through food baskets, and this may lead to risks of corruption, especially because a crisis situation requires a fast response of immediate impact. And that's why sometimes we have to flexibilize controlling measures to have a more fast response. This situation created a series of risks of corruption, as we can see in the screen, and these risks vary according to the axis we are mentioning and the stage we are, and also as for each. So that's why it's so important to have these exercises of risk evaluation so we can design mitigation measures that can respond to these measures. Now we will see some of those risks. The first correspond to the first economic aid packages for companies or citizens, or food baskets, or food tickets, food stamps to use in supermarkets, and corruption may happen here. And the risks regard the decisions about the packages that will be established and created and the beneficiaries for these packages. So here we started to buy and distribute our packages, and here we can have influence, traffic, conflicts of interests, having, for instance, a company that can be benefited, or a family member that can be benefited, accessing some packages that do not correspond to this beneficiary, or through public procurement, we can decide which products that will be part of these packages. For instance, from home to buy rice. And then in second, we have risks related to public service contracts. But I would like to highlight the package distribution. Here we have risks as bribery to access packages that do not correspond to a certain person, or benefits or food stamps that I not entitled to. So I will be abusing of these packages, extortion of citizens that do have a right to receive a package, but the public servant ask economic benefit in exchange. And also there is abuse of functions and obstructions that, although there are conflicts of interests like nepotism and favoritism to distribute aid to family members, for instance. With vaccines, we saw that sometimes we have family members of servants that should not be receiving because they are not priority group, but they do receive. And also to receive companies that will receive bonus that do not correspond, or servants or employees that are involved in this type of scheme to produce offenses together with the company. And also in public contracts, as I said in the previous slide, by flexibilizing controls, there are more risks of corruption. And here is very clear, because in the moment of crisis, we suspend some measures so we can have emergency contracts due to time constraints. And here we see some of the classic risks in public contracts. that can be exacerbated in moments of emergency. For instance, the pre-tender underestimating or superestimating the purchase, or doing purchase at elevated prices, so or undervalued invoices, company making more money with the products, having the quality that is not proper, that is too high or too low for a specific product. And here again, we can benefit a company that is selling face masks that are not of the required quality, but we let them be in the tender process.
Also, we may think that we are buying a medication that we know that it will expire within 3 months, but we are supposed to distribute in 5 months. If that's the case, this is a fraud. And also how we design the terms of reference that will really meet the needs of the company that we would like to benefit. Now, during the bidding process, a clear or common fraud risk is the public servant who would like to leak privileged information for the company so the company could prepare all the documents needed in order to be the one who will get this contract, also trying to expand the contract term in order to benefit a certain company. This kind of fraud is part of a risk that we run and is usually related to a bribery that is paid to a public servant in exchange of getting this contract. Also conflict of interest in which we benefit companies that even related to the public servant or the friends of this public servant. Another risk that we see in the post-bidding process will be to change the scope of the contract. Let's say that a bidding process was open to buy 5,000 face masks, and suddenly it's no longer 5,000, but rather 50,000. This is a way to change the scope of the contract in a significant way. And this could be a great risk of corruption. Also to accept a lower quality than the one expected. When you accept that quality, it's also another risk. Or if you change the orders, either the amount or to increase the price or cost are other examples of classical risks that we see in these public contracting processes. I would like to talk about best practices that we recommend in order to tackle those risks. But first of all, we need to define transparent and clear objectives about who the beneficiaries will be for these socio-economic aid programs, and to open channels of communication so everybody knows exactly who those people are and they can report any illegal act. Also, we need to keep in mind of the risks that are part of the methodology that we choose when we make any payment. Let's say that we're using an intermediate, a third party for this distribution. If that's the case, we need to run the due diligence, and we know that we need to exert certain control over that third party that we're using. Technology usage, it's a best practice in order to improve the process so the process could be more transparent and more efficient as well. Also, the comprehensive mechanisms as audit, supervision, accountability, reporting, which is the subject matter of today. And I would like to congratulate you all for such a great initiative. Reporting, this is key. We need to keep the citizens up to speed. And if possible, we need to foster them to be involved in the decision-making process through open consultation processes. And now that I'm here, I would like to highlight such an important role of the SAIs. This is something that it's been highlighted in the documents that I recommend you can read about this topic. We need to strengthen the SAIs that play a key role on the daily work that has to do with public management, and even more during a crisis, during an emergency. In an emergency like this, it's really important for the SAIs to have legal framework that can ensure the integrity of its members, so the SAIs have the financial and human capacity needed to conduct these processes, these audits, which are so important during a crisis. Also, it will be great to be able to gather all the knowledge that SAIs have about corruption risks. The most common corruption risks, the Comptroller General offices have knowledge about most vulnerable processes, which are the institutions, the divisions which are most vulnerable. And during a crisis, the Comptroller Office could know exactly where to put the attention because of that information that they have. Another measures that will help to combat corruption are the examples that we see here, which are part of the examples that we see in the pandemic. For instance, prevention and research, anti-corruption processes, also to involve the anti-corruption authority in the decision-making process. So thanks to the expertise, this entity could maybe include certain mitigation, try to mitigate any corruption vulnerability area that's been identified. Also traditional strategies like transparent processes, due diligence, and the list that you can see on the screen. Also public hiring risks. We've seen certain measures that could be taken even more in emergency situations, like for instance, to have certain contracts that have been preset with maximum prices with product lists, so we can speed up the contracting process, but at the same time, having certain control over what's being contracted. This is something that I deem very important. This is just a interesting fact. There's a corruption risk in the endowments that a country may receive during a crisis, during an emergency, not only through a pandemic, but during an earthquake or as a result of a hurricane. Other countries may send donations to the country, and sometimes they disappear and they don't reach the citizen that needs this, or the countries that are waiting for these donations. And that's why we think that it's important to try to standard policies and systems which can strengthen the transparency and accountability for those donations, to think about mechanisms that could increase the traceability of those donations. Also, some recommendations for the future. The preparedness or readiness is key for prevention. I think that based on the best practices that we've been seeing, based on lessons learned, we could put in place legislation framework and plans that we can use in the future if any other emergency occurs, not only a pandemic, but as I said, in case of a hurricane or an earthquake, any emergency is a situation that requires a legal framework which will allow us to respond quickly. I would like to end up with certain examples of the technical support that UNODC is here to offer in order to mitigate the corruption risk during a crisis. And this can be done through the action plans, can be done preventing corruption, especially when it comes to public hiring, and also to make easier the public participation. We can review legislation, we can speed up administrative procedures to develop report mechanisms, and all this can be done including the gender dimension and human rights dimension as well. That's all I have for today, and now I'm going to share with you the link. You can see it up here on the screen in red. This link is a place in which you can find all the materials that we have, and also I will share with you the presentation. Once again, thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to congratulate you for such important initiative, especially in the context we're right now. Thanks, Cristina. The cooperation that it's been developed through your support, it's been a very fruitful one, and I hope that all the initiatives that will be conducted from now on could be as fruitful, not only for the institution, but also for the region as well. Now, trying to refresh what Christina said, it's really important to highlight that prevention of corruption is an axis that responds to the mandate of the GTCT. So the reflections provided by Ritter are key for the technical discussions that the audit teams will carry out in the following days of the workshop. As it was said before, we would like to invite the UNODC to closely monitor the execution, consolidation, and dissemination of the results of this coordinated audit. So, very well, to continue with the agenda and to talk about a similar initiative that is being carried out in Intosai community, Archana Shirsat, Deputy Director General of the Department of Professionalization and Relevance of SAIs of the Intosai Development Initiative, IDI, will talk about the progress in cooperative auditing for transparency, accountability in emergency funds. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Archana Shirsat, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Interside Development Initiative. First of all, thank you very much to OLACEFS, to the GTCT, and to our friends in GIZ for extending this invitation. Many of you work with us in the IDI, and as you know that we are an Intosai body, we are based in Oslo in Norway, and the vision that we have is a vision of seeing effective, accountable, and inclusive supreme audit institutions that contribute to value and benefits. And much has been said already about Intosai P12, so I will not go into it. This initiative that I would like to share with you today, the transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness in the use of emergency funding for COVID-19, or the TAI initiative, is one initiative in our portfolio of initiatives, which we call flagship audit initiatives for our COVID-19 response. We have other initiatives as well that refer to something that's happening in OLACEFS already, that is CASP, which is a cooperative audit on sustainable public procurement. There is an initiative related to auditing strong and resilient national public health systems, which is linked to SDG 3D. And there is also an initiative where we are helping the SAI of Uganda in auditing elimination of intimate partner violence against women, which is linked to SDG 5.2. As you will see that in the what we call, there is a shadow pandemic, and the incidence of violence against women has risen drastically and dramatically during this pandemic, and that is also one of the effects of the pandemic. But this particular initiative, unlike the others which are visualized as SDG audits and pilots of ISM, this initiative, unlike them, is a compliance audit. So I'd like to speak a bit more to this, what we are planning to do in this initiative as it relates directly to COVID-19. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'll speak a bit about what are TAI audits and how will IDI and its partners support SAIs in conducting such TAI audits. Can I have the next slide, please? So TAI audits, and I was really very happy to see that a lot of what I'm going to speak here is already visualized in the initiative that you will be designing and working on. Unlike your initiative, which is a performance audit, the TAI audits are visualized as ESI-based compliance audits. We reflected a lot on what could be the nature of this audit, and the kind of need that came to us from the stakeholders that we consulted with in the SAIs was the need to have a very agile, real-time approach where within a very quick time frame, the SAI could turn around, produce a good, robust audit report, and submit it to its stakeholders so that action could be taken even as the pandemic evolves and even as different actions are being taken by government to respond to the pandemic. So we thought that maybe a compliance audit approach and an agile approach to compliance audit would be the best approach to take for SAIs to respond in an agile fashion to this pandemic. So besides being a compliance audit, we are also looking at agility. But this agility also works within the local context in different countries. There are some countries which are able to be agile by using remote auditing techniques and technologies, but there are other countries, because this is a global audit, who don't have access to that kind of technology, and neither do the audited entities have that kind of data. So it is planned for agility, but within the local context of each country that is participating in this audit. We are recommending to the SAIs to keep the scope of this audit extremely manageable. It can be kept manageable by looking at your universe, but then picking out specifically something that you can audit within a short period of time. That's not to say that you don't do other types of audits or you don't audit the whole spectrum, but you do it bit by bit. So for example, you can focus on emergency public procurements in a particular sector. You can focus on these within a time series. So you focus on those that have taken place in the last 6 months, audit them, report on them, then take up an audit of those that are happening in the next 6 months. So there are different ways in which the scope can be manageable so that you can get your report out very fast. There is a focus, not only typically what we have seen based on the survey that we have done, is that there is a lot of focus on accountability questions, especially in a compliance audit. But there isn't a similar focus on transparency or on inclusiveness. So this audit, we encourage SAIs, or the framework that is being built, will encourage Supreme Audit institutions to focus on all three aspects: transparency, accountability, and the broader aspect of inclusiveness. In the IDI, since last year, we have started working with facilitating audit impact, because we find that SAIs do very important pieces of work, but then you find that there is no impact of that particular audit. And we've started exploring this concept, and we have tried to now mainstream this concept of audit impact throughout the audit process. And this is something that will be reflected in the TAI audits as well. These are audits that will focus on audit impact. There will be a huge focus on stakeholder engagement. SAIs cannot do these audits alone, but the engagement will look at it throughout the audit process. And then when we look at this from the perspective of what kind of subject matter that SAIs can look at, we have 3 subject matters on which we are providing guidance, that is emergency public procurements, socio-economic packages, and recently we have added the 3rd one, which is vaccine rollouts, because we see that there is a lot of debate and discussions around vaccines. And all these subject matter can be looked at from a value framework, which has 5 dimensions, which I'll be discussing later, in order to contribute to systemic change, and not just in the current crisis, but overall having a more robust compliance framework for future emergencies as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the objective of this particular audit is to, in the longer run, the outcome that we're looking for is we are looking for a setting up of more transparent, accountable, and inclusive frameworks for emergency spending. And we want to see this consideration for inclusiveness mainstreamed throughout the use of public spending during emergencies. The next slide, please. We have more than 55 SAIs in all INTOSAI regions participating in this audit. And in OLACEFS, there are 10 SAIs. These are the SAIs, 10 SAIs, which have indicated their interest to participate. And I think we have received the statement of commitment from most of these SAIs. Our counterparts in the OLACEFS, which I'll come to the next slide. Can I have the next slide, please? This is an extensive cooperation being a global project, and our counterparts in the OLACEFS and across the world, they include the INTOSAI's Compliance Audit Subcommittee to give us guidance on how standards can be best used. The INTOSAI regions, and in this case, OLACEFS, and particularly the SAI of Mexico, which is our partner here as the chair of the OLACEFS Working Group on Disaster Management, which is working with us on this after consulting with the region. The International Budget Partnership, which is working a lot with budgets and specifically looking at the effects during COVID-19 times. World Bank, which again has been facilitating a lot of procurements and working a lot with emergency procurement, especially vaccines. Gavi, which is set up the COVAX initiative and who are again work extensively with looking at vaccines. ACCA, which is an accounting professional body based in the UK, which is also working with us to create more visibility for the work that we are doing. IADB and IMF. In IMF, again, they have their own capacity development initiative. We are also in talks with them on how we cooperate broadly for the purpose of transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness in the COVID-19 spending. Can I have the next slide, please? So the way we are supporting is we have done a needs assessment, which was a global questionnaire that was issued to all SAIs. And based on this questionnaire, we've also had leadership and stakeholder conversations in all the INTOSAI regions. We call it 8 regions typically because CREFIAF and AFROSAI, we are separate conversations. There is what we will be releasing next week is a practical guide for agile compliance audits, what we call a TAI audit practical guide. This guide will be available in English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. And linked to this practical guide, there is also a question bank. And I think this question bank could possibly be quite useful. It's a question bank that details out questions that auditors can possibly ask related to the 3 subject matter areas and related to transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness. We have, since last year, we work on online platforms during the pandemic. So we have set up what we call an integrated education and audit support platform to help SAIs. There will be a facilitation at not only the regional level, but at the local level. And then after the audit is done, we will also support SAIs in facilitating audit impact. The platforms and all the support is available in 4 languages, in Arabic, French, Spanish, and English. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is what the integrated education and audit support framework looks like. We have the educational content, which is broken into modules and units at a granular level. These are classes that will be conducted by regional mentors and by global mentors. We will also bring in experts to conduct these classes. Then we have a space for social learning where you can ask questions. You have a cafe. You have frequently asked questions, other webinars and webcasts on the topic conducted again by different people. Like, for example, IBP, we have been speaking with them that they will conduct sessions related to stakeholder engagement. We have our partners at Gavi who could possibly help those SAIs who are looking at vaccine rollouts. A lot of online workshops are planned, discussion forums are planned, and then the audit question bank that I mentioned. We have a section for other resources where there's a library of curated material links to other relevant online courses, videos and audios, social media links, web links. There is a lot of material out there, and if it's curated, it's quite useful input for the audit teams. So that is what we will make available on the other resources. And then there is a dedicated place where the audit teams will be supported by individual mentors to actually conduct these audits. Next slide, please. And this is what the value framework looks like. Talking to policy framework, rules and regulations, institutional arrangements, budget and resource allocation, implementation activities, monitoring and reporting. And it speaks basically to two fundamental questions, questions related to the compliance framework and questions related to compliance with the applicable rules, laws and regulations and policy decisions in terms of transparency, accountability and inclusiveness. I hope this will be useful for you in the work that you do, and we would be happy to share any material that you would want us to share in the course of your audit. So with that, I wish you best of the luck and thank you.
We thank the valuable intervention of Ashana Shirsat that established the commitment to for this work of compliance auditing in times of emergency with information that interests the states. Transparency is a cross-cutting approach in the coordinated audit planned by the GTCT. To conclude this inauguration act, I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Daniela Santana, Office, the Comptroller General Office of the Republic of Chile, Technical Liaison and President of the Gender Working Group of OLACEFS, with about the need to incorporate criteria of gender perspective when evaluating management of socio-economic aid programs. Daniela, you have the floor. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on when you are. I'm very happy with this invitation and to share this interesting panel today. I thank the interest of the team that is coordinating this audit in incorporating gender perspective in that. I prepared a presentation that I hope I can fit this in the time we have left, and I will start with by saying that today I will be presenting the gender working group of OLACEFS. That is a very new working group started last year that aims exactly to have a cross-cutting perspective of gender in our organization, understanding that we are part of this organization. So without much further ado, I will share my presentation with you. Well, my presentation has, I have 15 minutes, so I will pay close attention to time, but it is about the GTG, our working group on gender. We have as a general aim of a gender policy, to prepare a gender policy for OLACEFS that will be used as a framework to add this perspective in any work that we are developing now, which is extremely challenging and beautiful, and make us think of other topics, because COVID-19 pandemics impacted many aspects in our lives. Well, I'm talking to you from home. This is one of the aspects. There was an impact in public health, social, economic, psychological, and in particular, in our working group, we carried out a study with the support of the GIZ to determine how the pandemic impacted the work of SAIs. In this study, I conclude that in the reality of the SAIs is not different from the rest of the society, which is a harder impact for women. And this is the basic premise to develop this interesting auditing. Among other things, we can review this study that is published in the web, that is gender OLACEFS.com, and we see that there is a special impact in those who carry out non-paid work, caretaking work, and homework, especially taking care of children and elderly, has also an impact on the hours that we perform work. And this is symptomatic of what happened in the whole society. We had an unequal impact for women. And what is the role of SAIs? Oftentimes, we are based in the process of creation of this type of work, and currently in control entities. Why do we have to take care of this topic? Well, we won't find so far any international standard saying that SAIs should take care of that. What we have it is a bigger international framework that oblige the states to have a cross-cutting perspective of gender in all its actions. This comes from the UN conventions, political aspects, and in particular for SAIs, it is important to take into consideration some of the Intosai principles. For instance, the Intosai P12 that establish the benefit of principle 2, which is auditing, so the public and public bodies take care of their audience with objectives supporting the benefits in the public sector. So, and specifically the principle 4 that implied that SAIs have ethic in all their levels and in all their payroll. This is a framework to develop our gender perspective, and it's also the ISAI 110/30 that says that SAIs should adopt a set of values and principles to base their behavior upon. For instance, the need for supervision. And also in the GUID, there are, especially in 5202 and 5270, that has to do with the role of SAIs in sustainable development goals. For instance, in capacity building, and also in the GUID in 5270, there is the fight against corruption, that is also because it's related to corruption in the broad aspect, and we will see how corruption is related to gender. I will skip some slides, but you can review later on. So where all of that relates the impact of a pandemic or the post-pandemic, gender and corruption in the Agenda 2030, and especially in the SDGs. We know that as institutions dedicated to control the role of the state, we cannot implement the agenda directly, but we have to follow up the implementation. This was the mission that we recommended in Intosai, in our strategic plan, and in OLACEFS in particular. We have a great commitment with the follow-up of the SDGs, as the Controller Zarate mentioned in her speech. And here we see where everything relates, because when first of all, let's see the connection between corruption and exercise of rights and gender. So what is the role that we have when we audit the economic balances or the balance sheet of the public companies? So how to fight corruption? There is a focus on the human rights that indicate the negative consequence of corruption for human rights, which is also a paradigm. It's a new resolution with a paradigm to the victims, with the negative impact in the different groups that can be affected, establishing that the responsibility of fighting corruption is of the state. And as such, they have on one hand to avoid that corruption exists, and on the other hand, they have to react and present alternatives when corruption exists for certain groups of people that lead to the violation of human rights. In this case, the groups we evaluate are women. So why to have a focus of human rights? We have to understand that corruption facilitates, perpetuates, and institutionalizes the violation of human rights directly or indirectly. For instance, directly when a corrupt act is used directly to violate human rights, and indirectly when it has a role in a series of rights that may lead to the violation of human rights. For instance, a case of indirect effect is when people are deprived of liberty, they bribe the law enforcement to avoid avoid the punishment. So so what is the mission of the state? Is strengthening human rights in general, and in particular the principles. The principles here is participation, equality and non-discrimination, inclusion, rendition, accountability, transparency, and a state of welfare. So if we do that, we have a valuable tool to fight corruption. So we cannot see this as isolated issues. Actually, we have to make an effort that they reinforce one another, integrating this strategy for, on one hand, to fight corruption, and on the other hand, to guarantee human rights to advance. And where can we analyze how these two things, these two facets interact? Well, in one stage, in politics and policies that we can analyze. In evaluation, what we have to ask, which human rights have to be that this policy should tackle. This policy that is the planning and design of goals and objectives for the program, and if it was formulated based on the international human rights. This also implies in considering the consequences of a certain program to achieve human rights. In the implementation phase, the subject of the right, which is the people, we have on one hand the subjects of the human rights, and the other hand the state, and they have to involve. So we have to empower the subjects and strengthen the obligations of this subject. And in this stage, we should have participation of all of those who are affected by a certain program policy that is being evaluated. And in the part of monitoring or follow-up during the program implementation, we have to ensure that it was implemented, and so considering that we have this change of paradigm that invite the international system to analyze that if the program is also concerning to incorporate the gender issues in the fight against corruption. So we have on one hand private subjects of the state, and the other hand the subjects of rights like citizens. We can see what happens with certain groups of citizens. And I invite you to see what are the specific repercussions for women in an event of corruption. Corruption have a specific biases for women. This is because in the world we have some relations of power established of vulnerability to many women. For instance, in the human traffic has a lot to do. I don't mean that it doesn't have traffic of men, but they are mostly women. These are corruption acts that usually are associated and involve embarrassment both in the public and private environment.
We also need to think to public service access and how women who are at the poverty level do not have so much access to that. Access to public services like education, health, water, energy could also be exposed to extortion, which is a specific way of extortion which is impacting women. They don't report oftentimes, and as a result, it's very difficult to monitor because if we don't have the data, the claims, and not public policies, as a result, we end up in a vicious cycle. Corruption, as you all know, creates cuts on the public budget, and unfortunately, this implies reduction on education investment, and it has an impact on women as well. As for political participation, there's a restriction to access to these jobs because the participation of women in politics is something that is very recent, especially in our region. I could say that it's been only 70 years in which we see women involved in politics, and 3.5 of the seats of parliaments worldwide are being places or seats in which we have women. And this doesn't show the different realities of women. And this increase gender inequality. As for economic empowerment, informal and informal work, it's something in which we see corruption. And this is a barrier for women to make money or to keep their jobs. In many contexts, women don't have access to their own funds or they don't have control on the funds that they need to manage. And sometimes women don't have access to services and loans as well. As for human rights, in many countries, there's no uneven application of law when it comes to women's having the right of having property, financial independence, when it comes to divorce or custody of children. So the systems of justice sometimes are corrupted, and it doesn't allow any progress on this regard, and that's why people or women are most vulnerable. So this is a way in which corruption could impact women. Now, when we assess a public policy, we need to think about the human rights. Agenda 2030 calls for a comprehensive assessment of all these. SDG 5, SDG 1 that has to do with poverty, SDG 16, which calls for fight against corruption and to strengthen public entities, giving importance to principles like accountability, transparency, and inclusivity. If we keep all that in mind, the challenge is to translate all this evidence that I show you and to think about the gender and how we can see gender in corruption, anti-corruption, so how we can translate this in effective strategies and policies. And if we do so, we're able to include the gender perspective in the fight against corruption, which is not an easy task. But for that, we need to have knowledge. So I'm very happy to tell you that Gender Working Group has been working on capacity building, and there will be a course for non-discrimination and gender with the support of GIZ, led by the Chilean SAI, and you will be able to see in that course the role that the SAIs will play during an audit. So going to the next slide, you will see the steps that we defined as part of the course. There are many questions you can ask yourself when you carry out an audit. For instance, is there a strategy? Is there any international commitment? Policies are clearly in order to achieve SDG 5, recruitment strategy. Do I have clear information for that? Is this strategy, has this strategy been integrated? Are there any hurdles for the implementation? Is there any budget for gender equality? Is there any participation system for the civil society and NGOs? Is there any budget related to SDGs? And these are just some of the ideas that you will be able to see and understand better as part of the course that we are going to do. And I invite you to take part of that course. You can find all this information in our website. And I would like to once again thank you for the invitation. And I thank the organizers for inviting us today. Thank you very much to Daniela. There's no doubt that the comments that you gave us are key to ensure an inclusive view and also to keep in mind the intersectionality when we carried out coordinated audit. It also called states to consider the differentiated impact of corruption depending on gender. As we've said before, we want to stress our commitment so gender perspective can be a key criteria on the planning of this initiative. Now interventions are over, so this session is being adjourned, and we thank the participation of audit groups which have the task to define key aspects that will differentiate this coordinated audit. Thank you very much, and I wish all of you a good day. Thank you.